All right, good evening, everybody. Gonna see if this thing works. I have no idea. Trying to do Facebook Live for the first time, but using a presentation with it. So hopefully you are seeing it. So today's program is Influential Women of Waukegan's Past. First off, my name is Ty Grower. I am Manager of Cultural Arts with the Waukegan Park District and the Waukegan Historical Society. This History Lunch and Learn is part of a Waukegan History Museum program. Generally, we do these, host them at the Jack Benny Center for the Arts. We had to cancel last Fridays for reasons that we all understand today. And for the foreseeable future, we will do these live, Facebook Live versions. Hopefully it works out okay for everybody. So thank you for joining. And let me jump right on in there. So to start off with, I have The Power of Women in Waukegan's Past. This was written by Ruth Gregory in 1955. Ruth Gregory was a nationally honored library professional, head librarian of the Waukegan Public Library for 36 years. And she helped guide the library in many different innovative ways. Was an author, community leader, civic motivator, and also helped move the facility from the Waukegan Carnegie Library to the current location. So we read today first the prologue from The Power of Women in Waukegan's Past by Ruth Gregory. The women who came to Little Fort in northern Illinois in the 1840s, like all pioneer women of America, were a most resolute type. It is difficult in an age of streamlined trains, jet airplanes, paved roads, and indoor plumbing to comprehend fully just what that word resolute meant during the opening up of the West. Most of the women who came to Little Fort in the middle of the 19th century traveled overland on springless wagons or on horseback. Some of them, like Saranda Lyon, who came here in 1845, shipped out from Buffalo on a slow-moving, crude steamer that plied the waters of the Great Lakes. Saranda Lyon wrote a letter home to her brother 9 weeks after her arrival. All she said about the journey was the large lakes were all rough. I was sick. That is probably the classic understatement of the 19th century. The men of the 1840s worked hard for their families. There were homes to be built, factories and stores to be started. For the men, too, was the excitement of county politics. The place of their women was in the home. Saranda Lyon and her friends were not perturbed by the inconveniences of those homes or by the mud that came with the spring or the bitter cold that came with the winter. When they wrote to their people in the East, it was to tell of the breathtaking beauty of acres of wild fruit trees in blossom, or of the majestic oaks that grew all over the village of Little Fort, or of the everlasting fascination of the waters of Lake Michigan and the clean white expanse of the lakefront. These women of the 1840s were truly helpmeets of men who were building a city. They came largely from New England, where they were established churches, schools, libraries, and study clubs. The men of Little Fort had their sights lifted to a level of economic success, which symbolized personal security for their families. The women of Little Fort had a vision of an organized society with values which would bring inner security to their children and their children's children. The institutions which grace our way of life in 1955 had their beginnings in the attitudes and activities of the women who lived in Little Fort 110 years ago. The advantages which this generation takes for granted were gained by the hard-working women of Little Fort and generations of the spiritual descendants. These women have not received the credit which is due to them. Research shows that all of the good things which developed in this town had women behind them. These women were natural-born psychologists, even though some of them probably never heard the word. They were, until 1913, second-class citizens. They had a vote, but they were smart. Generations of Waukegan women made plans, earned money to support their plans, and then talked to their husbands into presenting those plans to whatever authority there might be. The women achieved their goals. The men got the credit and the presidencies. Again, that was The Power of Women in Waukegan's Past by Ruth Gregory in 1955. Now we'll jump into the program. I have picked out a few different women to talk about today. Of course, we don't have time to talk about everybody. Well, maybe we do have time, but I don't have a lot of my research with. It's over at the museum and the archives, so this is kind of what I had, but we will make do. Again, please keep enjoying. So we kick off with one of the iconic old homes in Waukegan, the home of James Cory at 321 North Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue. Now, James Cory himself was an icon of early Waukegan. Was part of many different business ventures, but also the owner of the Waukegan Gazette. This was the weekly newspaper at the time. Now, with James Cory, we know that he was an abolitionist. He was against slavery. And there are wonderful stories associated with the Cory family as well as with the Cory home. Stories associated with the Underground Railroad. Now, it's impossible to fully know the magnitude of the use of the home. The Underground Railroad, such a difficult subject to understand and know because of how secret it was. But these stories have been passed down from generation to generation through the Cory family and others. Now, one of the best stories that fits in with today's subject of influential women is that of the Cory family's young servant girl. Her name was Merina. And I'm going to zoom into the bottom corner of this picture. In this picture, you can see on the sidewalk a young boy in front of the fence, but directly behind him, young African-American girl in a white dress. We believe this to be Merina. Merina was employed by the Cory family in the 1850s. Now, with Merina, we don't know a whole lot about her. We don't know where she came from. We also don't know what happens to her. So we could kind of look into that, the fact that we don't know much about her. Well, she might have been a former slave herself who decided to stay with the Cory family for a bit and help out. She may have been an earlier fugitive runaway slave that came prior to 1850 or shortly thereafter. We're not exactly sure. But after 1850, with the Fugitive Slave Act at that point, really all African Americans had to leave the United States to gain or maintain their freedom, their independence. But the story is that, well, everybody in town knew Merina because James Cory would send her all around town doing various chores for his various business ventures. And James Cory did employ quite a lot of people. And they would also be walking around with Merina. And this is how he would get the slaves, reportedly, from his home down to the lakefront. He would tell these slaves that they were going to walk during the day. A lot of people were going to see them, but everything would be okay because they would be walking with Merina. So she would take them around town doing the various chores. It's reported that people did see others with Merina, but they were never stopped. Maybe some suspected, but they were happy that these slaves were continuing their journey to freedom. So Merina plays the part of conductor on the Underground Railroad. Next, we have Jane Strang McAlister. She was born in Scotland in 1817. And when her family immigrated to the Millburn area in 1838, Jane married John McAlister. and they settled in Canada for a time after that. Later, Jane and John moved to a farm in Newport Township. They eventually came to Waukegan, where John passed away in 1888. Jane McAlister continued to live in Waukegan, and at some point she became aware of the need for Waukegan to have a true hospital building. In the summer of 1903, she donated $20,000 for the purpose of building a hospital in Waukegan. The Liebeck House was moved back so that the Jane McAlister Hospital could be built on North Avenue and Franklin Streets. The hospital was a 34-bed building. It first admitted patients on September 24th, 1904. Jane was not around to see that, however, as she had died the previous October 28th, shortly after making her major contribution. The McAlister Hospital still stands today. It is no longer, though, a hospital, as Waukegan continued to grow. Larger facilities were needed, such as Victory Hospital and then St. Therese Hospital. But that is our first true hospital building. The first before that were in old homes. Back to the Cory family. I just introduced you to the story with James Cory, the Underground Railroad, and Merina. Well, here is Kate Cory. She was born in 1861. James was her father. She grew up in Waukegan, and this is where she was also educated. When her father James sold the Waukegan Gazette paper, they moved to New York City, and there Kate received training in art. Kate moved to Arizona as part of an art colony among the Hopi Indians. She lived among them for 7 years, attended ceremonies, took photographs, and painted scenes depicting the Indian life and customs as she studied them. She was eventually invited to join the Hopi tribe, but she declined. Her works are displayed in many museums, including the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., and locally, 3 of her paintings from her time with the Hopi are on display at the Waukegan History Museum. And Kate is considered to be one of the great artists of the American Southwest. Today, she is remembered in Waukegan through the Waukegan Arts Council. We do have the Kate Cory Award that goes to artists that have moved away from Waukegan generally, but have never forgot their hometowns, but have helped to spread the knowledge of the arts. Now, right now, of course, the Waukegan History Museum is closed due to the coronavirus. Once we are reopened, come and take a look at the Kate Cory paintings. The one that we have here doesn't look very good on the screen, but once you're seeing them in person, they're beautiful pieces of artwork. And these paintings that Kate Cory did, they really were some of the very first time that people were able to see how the Hopi people lived. The Hopi were a very secluded tribe that didn't let in a lot of outsiders, but did like Kate and allowed her to depict their life for others to see. Next, we have Beatrice Pearce. Beatrice Pearce was born in Waukegan on January 10th, 1866. Her father was William S. Pearce, who is a well-known druggist in Waukegan, pharmacist. She graduated from Waukegan High School in 1883. Beatrice then completed her professional studies at the Women's Medical College in Chicago, graduating there. And she started her practice in Waukegan in 1887. And her office was located at the corner of Genesee and Washington Streets above the family drugstore. This corner still by some is remembered as Pierce's Corner. She was highly recognized in her profession and was known among the intellectual women in Waukegan. Beatrice specialized in diseases for women and children. She was an active member of the Lake County Medical Society and was treasurer and vice president of the group. Beatrice met her future husband at a convention in Portland. She married Dr. George Dickinson in 1908. They decided to open a joint medical practice together, not in Waukegan, but in Alaska. Here we see Gertrude Carman, along with her home, which still stands at 650 Grand Avenue. It is a historic landmark today. Gertrude Carman was born in 1880. She was educated in the Waukegan schools, and she received her college degree from Northwestern University with an emphasis on German and Latin. After teaching in Iowa, she returned to Waukegan and taught in Andrew Cook, McAlister South and West schools. She was appointed principal of McAlister in 1919 and held that position until her retirement in 1945. Her contributions to all were recognized by the school district in 1968 by naming a new school for her at the site of the McAlister School after it had been razed. The city council proclaimed Gertrude Carman Week at the time of her 100th birthday. She died at the age of 101. Bess Bauer Dunn was born in 1877. She was recognized at the time of her death in 1959 as having done more for the preservation of Lake County history than anyone else. Being the head of the Lake County Historical Society was only one of her many accomplishments. Bess began working in the county courthouse on April 1st, 1899, and continued working there until her death in 1959. She was the first woman to serve on a county jury. But she was also known for, well, being one of the very first actresses to be in a moving picture. Bess, along with her friend Isabel Spoor, were invited over to Edward Ahmet's house on North Avenue. Ahmet was a local inventor. Now, Bess and Isabel, they knew Ahmet liked photography. So with this invitation, they expected, well, to be photographed. And he did tell them to wear their nicest, fanciest dresses. So they show up expecting this to be some kind of photography session. And Ahmet gives them boxing gloves. And in his backyard, he had built a boxing rink. And there he was going to use his magnoscope, one of the very first practical motion picture projection in cameras, to make a movie of Bess and Isabel boxing. And this was a short film that Ahmet was making to be a comedy called Morning Exercise. You also might see it named Two Girls Boxing, things like that. Well, the two girls, they got in the ring, playfully boxed with each other, thinking that no one would ever see this. But Bess remembered she was out in Washington. And as she was out there, a gentleman stopped her and said that she looked very familiar. And he worked at the movie theater. And he said that they had this short comedy movie being played of two girls boxing, and she just looked just like one of those that was boxing. Now today, Bess Dunn is remembered and honored at the new Bess Dunn Museum. So this is the Museum of the Lake County Forest Preserves, located in Libertyville. The museum was formerly known as the Lake County Discovery Museum. And upon their move, they decided to rename their museum in honor of Bess Dunn for all that she had done for Lake County's history. I'm sure that museum is also closed right now, but highly recommend it once it is up and running to find out more about Bess, along with the Edward Ahmet story, and to even see one of those famous magnoscopes. Up next is Ina Curtis. She was born in Wisconsin in 1893. She moved to Waukegan in 1919 to resume her teaching career, and she was first teaching at North School. When Glen Flora School opened in 1921, Ina was appointed principal, and she retained that position until her retirement in 1953. She served the school district for 34 years. Now, on an interesting note, Ina Curtis was president of the Young Women's Christian Association, and it was on October 14th, 1935, as president of that organization, of the YWCA, well, she had the honor and privilege of introducing the guest speaker of that evening to Waukegan, the famed aviatrix Amelia Earhart. So yes, Amelia Earhart was in Waukegan. This is going to be a story that we are going to cover in our first history podcast. Next week, I will be interviewing someone who was in the audience for Amelia Earhart's presentation. So in that podcast, we will get to hear firsthand account of what that experience was like. So once that podcast is available, we will let you know through our social media, of course. It'll be our first one with many more to come. Speaking of flying, here we have Janice Christensen. Now with Janice Christensen, this is a story that really we just kind of became aware of not long ago, actually back in 2018. See, Janice Christensen started flying lessons at age 29 at the Waukegan Airport. This was in 1942. And she was an original member of the Waukegan Civil Air Patrol. By March of 1943, Christensen had completed 90 hours of flying time and was selected to the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, also known as WASPs. And she was one of only 1,800 WASPs to be in that program. She left for training at Avenger Army Field in Sweetwater, Texas, graduating in Class 43-W-5 on September 11th, 1943. After graduation, Christensen was stationed at Romulus Army Airfield in Michigan until she returned to Avenger Field, where she completed an advanced instrument flying course. She was then stationed at Cochran Army Airfield in Macon, Georgia, until the WASP program was disbanded in December of 1944. She continued to be active in aviation as a member of the Civil Air Patrol. In 1949, she joined the Air Force Reserve with the rank of First Lieutenant, and she received an honorable discharge with the rank of Captain on November 7th, 1963. Christensen died in 1965. And in 1979, WASPs were granted veteran status. But it wasn't until November of 2018 when an official military service took place at her gravesite in North Chicago. And in this ceremony, Janice Christensen officially was recognized as a World War II veteran. Next up, we have Mary Bunny Foley. Mary Foley, or known by everybody or most as Bunny, well, she was an aerospace physiologist who performed groundbreaking research on the effects of weightlessness, long-term acceleration, hypertension, and head cooling. And again, this is one of these stories. We didn't know much about Bunny until, unfortunately, she passed away. But happy to share her story now. And she passed away recently on April 20th, 2019. Bunny was the daughter of Dr. John D. Foley and Catherine Gorman Foley of Waukegan, Illinois. She graduated from high school at the age of 16 and earned her BS and RN from Xavier College, Chicago in 1950. Bunny received her surgical nurse training at the Mayo Clinic, St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota in 1952. She taught operating room techniques at Madison General Hospital, Wisconsin, and then at Mercy Hospital Xavier in Chicago. In 1955, she became interested in the air transport of invalids. She spent 3 months traveling to Asia, Africa, and Europe, meeting with airline medical directors and surveying their handling of patients, and published The Air Travel for Patients that established the standard for travel agents. She returned to the United States to join the Air Force in 1958 as a flight nurse assigned to Scott Air Force Base. In 1960, after 2 years of active duty, she joined the research team at Ohio State University's Aviation Medicine Research Laboratory in the study of pulmonary effects of oxygen and air mixtures on the performance of professional pilots and the effects of altitude on pulmonary function and disease processes. In 1966, she began studying the effects of zero gravity on pulmonary functions in the university's cardiopulmonary laboratory. As an Air Force reservist at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, she spent weekends and 2 weeks of active duty each year pursuing research for the Air Force. From her service record, it says, the background and versatility of Major Foley marked her as unique among Air Force reserve nurses. Considering the short length of her tours actually served with the AMRL, her contributions have been truly outstanding. Now, as a scientist and a test subject, she flew in zero-gravity parabolas and operated the human centrifuge to understand G-force limits for pilots. Her service record commends her contributions to the understanding of effects of weightlessness on lung capacity and the likely performance limitations on astronauts, the physiological effects of prolonged acceleration, the stress reduction benefit of cooling helmets for F-16 pilots, and the importance of nutrition and acceleration stress tolerance were all things that she studied and did. The Air Force promoted her to major in 1964 and to colonel in 1975. From 1984 until 2000, she worked as an agency nurse for Manpower and Assured Healthcare Staffing in Gurnee. And Bunny served as the vice president of the Aerospace Medical Association, from which she received the 2009 award in 2016 Mary T. Klinker Award for her contributions in aerospace medicine. When she passed away, she was working on a book titled The History of Women in Aviation and Aerospace Medicine. Ann Christensen became the first alderwoman on Waukegan City Council in 1957. She had worked at Abbott Labs and in her husband's business when she became interested in elective office. When she ran in the 5th Ward primary, she defeated 4 men. In the general election, she garnered 64% of the vote. She did face some opposition by other members of the city council who were not accustomed to having a woman seated among them. Nevertheless, she worked on the council, served on various committees, and chaired the street lighting committee at one time. In her re-election primary 4 years later, she easily defeated former Mayor Joseph Keever and went on to repeat her 64% victory in the general election. And she retired from the council in 1965. And also Carol Preeter, she was first for Waukegan. She was the first female police officer hired, and that was in 1960. Up next, we have Isabel Buckner. She was born in Mississippi in 1939, but she actually has the distinction of being Waukegan's first African-American school principal. She was principal at Carman Elementary School for 27 years. She was able to institute the follow-through program, which found ways to include parents in their children's education. She looked to get parents involved whenever she could. She employed them as teacher aides. She had them come for evening activities, for dances, basketball games, using parents as scorekeepers, as refs. And she was active in many community and social groups. On November 9, 2001, Waukegan School District 60 renamed Carman Elementary School to Carman Buckner Elementary School. So that school honors both Gertrude Carman and Isabel Buckner today. Betty Currie was born in Mississippi in 1939. The family moved to Waukegan in the late 1930s, maybe early 1940s. Her father, Theodore Williams Sr., worked at the Waukegan Tannery. Betty Currie graduated from Waukegan High School in 1957. She then spent 2 years as a typist at the Great Lakes Naval Station. She then moved to Washington, D.C. for a government job. She worked for the Peace Corps and State Department for 26 years. She was able to retire at age 44. But she didn't just stop at age 44. She worked as a volunteer in the campaigns of 3 successive National Democratic candidates, Geraldine Ferraro in 1984, Michael Dukakis in 1988, and Bill Clinton in 1992. She worked as Warren Christopher's assistant, and he brought her to Bill Clinton's attention. And Clinton decided to bring Betty Currie to the White House to be his personal secretary. So she was personal secretary to the president while Clinton was in office. And you can see a few pictures there. So her desk was right outside of the Oval Office. And then at the conclusion of President Clinton's second term, the Clinton's family cat, Socks, the most famous cat of the 1990s, went home with Betty Currie. Shirley Tometz. I need to find a better picture of Shirley than her wedding picture here. She played an integral part in the desegregation of the Waukegan schools. The issue of racial segregation of schools arose during the early 1960s. Shirley led a group of parents, and they sued the Board of Education to desegregate Whittier School in Waukegan. This eventually led to the outcome of desegregation of the Waukegan schools. Shirley was very active in civil rights in the early 1960s and was recognized by numerous public organizations for her hard work, dedication, and pioneering spirit in many efforts. Another significant accomplishment in civil rights was her work as a primary founder of Waukegan's Project Head Start in 1964. And this became the pilot program for a national program of the same name. Among her awards were the Civil Liberties Award in 1967 and recognition from the American Civil Liberties Union and the Lake County Community Action Project. Next is author Eleanor Taylor Bland. She was born in Boston. Came to the area at a young age, though, and was living on McAlister Avenue in Waukegan. She eventually starts to write, becomes an author of crime and suspense novels, crime fiction. And Marty McAlister is the heroine in these books. She's an African-American female police detective, and McAlister name of that character came from the street that she lived on in Waukegan. Her novel Dead Time, for example, takes place in Lincoln Prairie, Illinois, the fictional equivalent to Waukegan and Zion and North Chicago kind of blended together. Eleanor Taylor Bland published 14 books from 1999 to 2007. She passed away on June 2nd, 2010. Now here we have two very important women, not just for Waukegan, but really for Illinois and for the country. If this was successful, we will do another one of these History Lunch and Learns on Facebook Live, and we'll try again next Friday at noon. And the story we will share will be on what is known as the Bowen Country Club. So this will feature the stories of Louise de Koven Bowen and Jane Addams. And the Bowen Country Club was a summer camp for underprivileged immigrant children of the Hull House in Chicago. And it was a camp that was in Waukegan for 50 years at where today's Bowen Park is. So I hope you can join us for that story. I don't want to give away any more. I want you to join at next week's Lunch and Learn to hear more about Jane Addams, Louise de Koven Bowen, and their connection to Waukegan with the Bowen Country Club. And I've pulled together a few highlights for Waukegan women over the years. First off, the first graduating high school class in Waukegan was in 1874. There were only 4 graduates, and they were all girls. Not sure what happened to the boys. I probably have some ideas. One of my favorite stories that we found or refound, stories are lost for a period of time, right? But then they're always found again. This one was for 4th of July weekend in 1913. This was a very big event in Waukegan. This was going to be the first time for the people in Waukegan to see an airplane. Not only were they going to get to see it, 2 lucky Waukeganites were going to get to take a ride. 1 boy, 1 girl. Now it was up to the people of Waukegan to vote on who was going to ride in this plane. You could cast as many votes as you wanted, but each vote cost you 1 penny. Well, the aviator Max Lilly, he was hired to bring his Wright brothers style biplane to Waukegan. Thousands reportedly had gathered at Electric Park. Electric Park is today's Weiss Field. They heard the airplane coming in, Max Lilly landed, and it was time for the first trip for the first Waukeganite to ride in an airplane. Hilda Palo had won that honor. She had been voted on by the folks of Waukegan, a recent graduate of Waukegan High School. So Hilda Palo knew that she was going to go up in this plane, and she was wearing a nice, beautiful dress. If you're looking at the picture of that biplane, that is not the best kind of clothes to wear on that type of plane. So they found some rope to tie the dress around her to keep it from flying around, and then she was loaded up onto the airplane. Max Lilly, though, realized that he did not have enough room to take off with 2 people on board, Hilda and himself. So they were thinking, where would they have enough land to be able to take off? And they decided, well, the golf course, the Glen Flora golf course. Hilda Palo was driven to the Glen Flora golf course while Max Lilly flew the plane over there. Here we actually have a picture of that occasion. We believe this picture is taken at the golf course. They loaded Hilda Palo up into the plane. Max Lilly took off, and they were flying above Waukegan. Hilda Palo was loving the sights, enjoying her experience up in the air. What she did not realize, though, was that the engine had stalled. They weren't flying anymore. They were just slowly crashing. Luckily, Max Lilly was able to get the engine restarted. He landed the plane safely, but decided that that was the only ride for the day. So the young man who was voted upon to go up in Max Lilly's plane never got to go. Only Hilda Palo, the first person in Waukegan to ride in an airplane. Next, big moment for women of Waukegan, getting to vote for the very first time, September 29th, 1913. Now, this is prior to the 19th Amendment. At this point in Illinois, women were able to vote on certain things, not everything, but certain things. Now, it's interesting reading the newspaper leading up to this first vote. You have editorials written by men saying that now that women were given the right to vote, they didn't expect the women to actually vote. They just wanted the right, but didn't actually want to do it. But then in the same newspapers, you see advertisements that women had put out with different businesses, different organizations, where they were gathering to meet, to teach each other how to vote, to learn about the issues that they were voting on. Now in Waukegan, the first vote wasn't on anything truly important. It was on what company would own the franchise of the streetcar. But that day, women had gathered outside of the polling stations before they opened, and it was realized at that point that yes, women actually were going to vote, and this was really going to change society. So women came out in very big numbers for this first vote, and then really that first newspaper afterwards, people are realizing that certain things that had been voted down in the past, now with women voting, well, they were likely now going to go into effect. One of the big changes, well, local prohibition. This happens before the national prohibition takes effect, but after women are able to vote, they do vote for local prohibition to start. But we also have other things like the forming of the Waukegan Park District. And this is really thanks to women having that right to vote. And especially thank the Waukegan Women's Club. See, the Waukegan Women's Club realized the need for Waukegan to establish a formal park system dating back to the 1890s. And during this time, the city was growing with people coming from all over the world to work at the new lakefront factories. The Waukegan Women's Club wanted to ensure that beautiful lands would be reserved as parks for future generations to enjoy. The first attempts at organizing a park district in Waukegan failed, though, as the people of Waukegan voted down the referendum. Undeterred, the Waukegan Women's Club, along with other civic leaders and entities, continued to push for a park district. Around 1910, the Women's Club, under the guidance of their president, Mrs. Marion Upton, hired renowned Chicago architect Dwight K. Perkins to formalize an extensive park plan for Waukegan to be incorporated once the park district formed. Up to this point of time, women had a strong voice in making changes and improvements in Waukegan, but they could not show their influence at the polls. This all changed in 1913 when women in Illinois received the right to vote. On December 26, 1916, for the first time, women now had the opportunity to vote yes to the Waukegan Park District. Finally, after many years pushing for the Park District by the Waukegan Women's Club, the vote passed overwhelmingly at a number of approximately 4-1. Of the 459 votes cast for the forming of the district, over half were made by women. Some of the earliest actions of the Park District were to acquire the lands outlined in the Perkins Plan that had been commissioned by the Waukegan Women's Club. Today we can visit beautiful Roosevelt, Washington, and Powell parks, thanks to the foresight and vision of the Waukegan Women's Club. So that concludes our Facebook Live event, our History Lunch and Learn, Influential Women of Waukegan's Past. Join us next week. We will do the Bowen Country Club story. So a great story about kids getting together, enjoying nature, enjoying experiences at what is today's beautiful Bowen Park. As I know most of you are at home, we're trying to incorporate some new things to keep you engaged with Waukegan's history. We have brought back our Waukegan's Top 50 History Events Tournament. We, of course, don't have March Madness basketball right now, but we can still have a tournament bracket. So every day at 9 o'clock, jump on into the Waukegan History Museum Facebook page to vote on the different matchups. We brought back the Caption This interactive exhibit. We're going to do this on Facebook. So basically, we're going to post a picture. We're not going to put a whole lot of content to it. We want you to tell the story. So have fun, make up some things, but keep it PG. On the Waukegan Historical Society website, you will start seeing some of our past exhibits up there as well. So you can take a look at those and enjoy. Maybe you got to see them when they are up at the Waukegan History Museum, maybe not. But now you can read them in the leisure of your home. And there's a lot of wonderful Waukegan history to be told there. So thanks for joining. Again, my name is Ty Rohr, Manager of Cultural Arts for the Waukegan Park District and the Waukegan Historical Society. This was a History Lunch and Learn of the Waukegan History Museum. We will continue next Friday with another one. Hopefully one of these days we will be back up and running for people to come and join us. But hope you enjoyed today's story, Influential Women of Waukegan's Past. This is Ty Rohr signing out.